Today we'll be presenting you with a filmography trekking appraisal of the mighty John Huston's cinematic works, a celebrated director whose output is insurmountably worthy of any appraisal with all and any assessments. Our focus will be toward 1950's The Asphalt Jungle, although this will be an overall decade-crossing look back at Huston's cinematic triumphs. Maybe even to this present disingenuous, connivingly performative, contemptible day, Huston's features are amongst the more continually appraised of 20th century American films. For this title, The Asphalt Jungle, in the images on the screen, we have the director composing among his very enrapturous ventures. It is one of the generally finest pictures from his compositional yielding. We could consider Asphalt Jungle to be on the par with works like Maltese Falcon, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, The Misfits, List of Adrian Messenger, Night of the Iguana, Kremlin Letter, Man Who Would Be King Wiseblood, and then not very many films are generally on a par with his swan song opus 87's The Dead. In the noir continuum, it ought to rate incredibly well on any listing of the greatest features. Really, it would be one of at least 3 seminal classic films Huston was responsible for. And when one considers the output of John Huston, they identify several classics through the 1940s and eventually into the 1980s. There are very limited occasions of this in the history of film direction. Probably impossible not to begin with Maltese Falcon as an initial iconic classic, and one could make the case for 42s Across the Pacific, and then a 46 documentary feature like Let There Be Light. Of course, many will assertively praise Key Largo and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Then going into the 50s, Huston's features might be his oddly least consistent, if broken up into the decade-defined periods. Clearly, Asphalt Jungle is a visceral, watchable, impactful classic, and I also rather like Red Badge of Courage. And like African Queen, quite casually, I'm aware of its identified imperfections, although I find the undertaking generally endearing. Moby Dick has some strengths, although I don't consider it a gallant classic. I do quite like aspects of Roots of Heaven. It is a good-looking film, though we could dismiss the screenplay prospectively. Into the 60s, we have Huston's finest decade. Whilst The Unforgiven is a bit lacking, though not without its strengths, it is easy to praise The Misfits, incredibly easy for me to praise the dynamite List of Adrian Messenger, and Night of the Iguana, one of Richard Burton's absolute greatest roles. I do like his Bible picture as well. Huston as Noah is one of the great moments of the medium. I'll fight you all on that. 4-year-old AOD would have loved that. He had a soft spot for the Noah's Ark narrative. He is a credited director on 67's Casino Royale, which I shamelessly champion. I also very much appreciate aspects of Reflections in a Golden Eye and A Walk with Love and Death, the former in particular. The 70s is another outstanding decade of Huston features, from the stirring Kremlin Letter to the enjoyable Last Run, relatively likeable Judge Roy Bean, new wave enthusiasm of Fat City, thrilling Macintosh Man, stupendous Man Who Would Be King. He was replaced on Love and Bullets, I believe of his own disinterest for the film, though it is a decent though not really classic Charles Bronson exercise. Stuart Rosenberg finished the job. And then you have Wiseblood, a creepy though excellent classic of America's accoladed 70s cinema. 80s Huston has its ups and downs. Phobia can be enjoyed if one is aware of what it is, a trash slasher-adjacent murder mystery. Mystery, well, not exactly. Oomph. I do like Under the Volcano, and as I inferred earlier, I revere his adaptation of Joyce's work, The Dead, though I don't like those other 3, which may be some of Huston's more commercially successful ventures, particularly of the latter days. Those are Escape to Victory, Annie, and Prizzi's Honor. I'm willing to hear of other American directors or directors anywhere who are creating such compelling works over the course of multiple decades. And in particular, wherein both his debut film and his final film were among their very best films ever. At this stage in time, directors like Coppola, Scorsese, and Eastwood have been working for decades. Woody Allen could be up there in terms of longevity. And from Europe, Bergman, Godard, Polanski, still alive, though perhaps preferably in a prison cell while he is, and especially Manuel de Oliveira, had decade-spanning outputs. However, did they all begin and close their careers with seminal classics? I would argue to some degree Coppola. I love Dementia 13 and his most recent Megalopolis, though I know the jury might not be in my favour on either. Plus, Coppola was much more inconsistent during his career compared with Huston, most would likely agree. Scorsese certainly didn't commence or contemporaneously continue his career with classics, although was consistent from the 70s through to the very early 90s, I feel. Eastwood begins with some splendid films, but his work by certainly the 21st century is highly inconsistent for me. Allen I don't like much after the early 90s or so. Bergman's films rise to classic status maybe by Sawdust and Tinsel, though I do love his final feature Saraband. Godard we may know my feelings of. Contempt was the real first mark of genius, and then I revere the era culminating in Image Book, so that one certainly competes in my own mind. Polanski is one of the best debuts ever, and even some of his films post Tess are worth a positive assessment. Pirates, Rantic, Ghostwriter, though most of his 21st century work seems to bore me. De Oliveira has work. His work gets interesting by the 60s or 70s. He first worked in the silent era, you'll believe it or not. And some of his 80s to 2000s works are superlative. His final film, Gebo and the Shadow from 2012, is a fairly strong picture, so my memory claims. There's other people. Kurosawa worked for many decades. Kurosawa was from the 40s through to the early 90s. Satyajit Ray, that's mid 50s through to the, again, early 90s. There's a few individuals there, to be certain. Name them in the comments if you feel the need. So there's John Huston and the Asphalt Jungle. Some great stuff, unquestionably.